I've always believed it's the small things that hold a marriage together. A gentle touch on the shoulder, his favorite mug waiting by the kettle, a kiss on the cheek when he walks through the door. But lately, those little gestures feel like whispers in an empty room. Alex barely looks at me anymore. He comes home late, says he's buried in work. I nod. I smile. I pretend to believe it. But deep down, something's wrong, and I can feel it in my bones. So I did what I've always done. I baked. I stood in the kitchen, the warm scent of cinnamon and vanilla wrapping around me like a memory. It's his favorite cake, the one I make every year for his birthday. Not too sweet, just a hint of lemon. I poured everything into it. Not just ingredients, but hope. Maybe if he sees how much I still care, how much I still try, he'll remember what we used to be. Maybe this could be the start of something better. I even picked up those pastries he loves from the bakery on Main, the ones with the flaky crust and cream filling. I tucked them next to the cake, wrapped it all in a navy ribbon, and held it close as I walked to the car. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from something softer. Hope, maybe. Or desperation. I just kept picturing the look on his face when he saw me at the door. Surprised, maybe even touched. That's what I wanted. A spark. A sign. Anything. The drive to Alex's office felt longer than usual. Maybe it was the way the sky had already started to dim, casting everything in that bluish glow that makes the world feel quieter, heavier. I glanced over at the box on the passenger seat at every stoplight, making sure it hadn't shifted. It felt silly, maybe, showing up unannounced like this. But I needed to believe this would mean something to him, that it would remind him I was still here, still trying. I rehearsed what I'd say in my head. Thought I'd bring you something sweet since you've been working so hard. Light, casual, not too emotional. I didn't want him to feel ambushed, just seen. And maybe he'd take a break, share a piece with me, laugh like we used to. I missed his laugh more than I cared to admit. It used to come so easily, especially when we were in the kitchen together, flour on our faces, dancing between timers and boiling pots. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed how empty it was. Just a few cars left, and his was one of them. That gave me a little jolt of relief. At least he was actually here. I grabbed the box, straightened my coat, and started walking toward the entrance. Every step felt heavier than the last. I told myself it was just nerves. Just that flutter of anticipation you get before something good happens. But there was a tightness in my chest I couldn't quite shake. Inside, the building was nearly silent. Just the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the echo of my heels on the polished floor. It felt eerie, like walking into a memory I didn't recognize anymore. I knew this place. I used to meet him here for lunch sometimes, back when we were still us. But tonight, something about the silence felt different. Too still. Like the building was holding its breath. I followed the corridor toward his office, holding the box carefully, trying not to crush the ribbon. The hallway lights were dimmed, and most of the doors were closed. I reached his door, just slightly ajar, and raised my hand to knock. But before I could, I heard it. A low chuckle, a woman's voice. Then, a giggle, intimate, familiar in a way that stopped me cold. I leaned closer, heart thudding. My knuckles hovered midair, frozen. And just like that, the warmth I'd carried all day turned to ice. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there, one breath away from the truth, cake in hand, heart wide open. And something inside me started to close. Not from panic, not even heartbreak. But something quieter, sharper. Something I wouldn't fully understand until I saw what was waiting on the other side of that door. I don't know why I pushed the door open just a little more. Maybe I needed proof. Not just sound, but sight. Maybe I hoped I was wrong. That I'd see him typing at his desk, alone, the radio playing quietly. But what I saw, it felt like the air had been punched out of me. Alex wasn't working. He was standing, arms around her, lips pressed to hers like she was the thing he'd missed all day. Her hands clung to his shirt, and his face, the softness in it. That's what broke me. I didn't make a sound. I didn't drop the box. Not yet. I just stood there, held in place by something I couldn't name. Shock, maybe. Or the beginning of something deeper. The kind of hurt that doesn't scream. It whispers, low and cruel, carving its way through bone. I watched for maybe 5 seconds, long enough to know it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't the first time. Their bodies spoke a language I hadn't heard from him in months. Then the box slipped. It was almost like my hands stopped caring. The ribbon loosened, the lid fell, and the cake, our cake, landed face down on the carpet. No one saw me. No one heard it. I stepped back before the frosting even settled. My heartbeat wasn't racing. It was slow, steady, cold. I turned and walked away without wiping the tears that hadn't even come yet. Because there was no room for tears. Not yet. I made it back to the car without looking back. The box was still open in my hands, crushed a little at the edges. Smudges of icing had clung to my coat. I didn't care. I didn't feel anything, not really. Just that strange, buzzing numbness that comes when your world tilts on its axis and no one else notices. I sat there in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel like it was the only solid thing I had left. The streetlights cast long shadows across the dashboard. Everything looked the same. But I wasn't. You always think you'll scream, that you'll throw something, that you'll charge in and demand answers, demand justice. But when you're standing in the moment, in that moment, all you want is to disappear, or rewind, or just pause long enough to catch your breath. I didn't want him to know I'd seen. Not yet. Let them feel safe. Let them believe they'd gotten away with it. Let them keep their stolen kisses and whispers. I'd learned something far more valuable in that doorway. I'd learned I was done begging for crumbs. I was done baking love into cakes only to be fed lies in return. And I was done being the woman who quietly swallows her own heartbreak to keep the peace. No, I wasn't going to explode. I wasn't going to fall apart. I was going to wait, quietly, calmly, and take back the power they thought I'd never have. Because revenge doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it walks out with frosting on its coat and a smile no one sees coming. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed beside a man who smelled faintly of a perfume I didn't wear. He snored softly, like nothing had changed. Like he hadn't pressed his lips to another woman hours before. I stared at the ceiling, the moonlight slicing through the blinds, tracing quiet lines across our bedroom wall. My chest didn't rise in sobs. My pillow stayed dry. What settled inside me wasn't grief. It was something colder, more precise. I wasn't breaking. I was sharpening. I started to remember the small things. His password written on a sticky note inside his drawer. How his texts synced to the tablet in the living room, where he left his gym bag, the one he always took to late meetings. I wasn't looking for drama. I was looking for truth, because truth, once you have it, is power. And I knew if I waited, if I stayed calm, I could gather every piece. Not to plead, not to argue, but to build something he'd never see coming. He rolled over once, mumbled my name in his sleep. I didn't answer. I just stared at him, at the familiar curve of his shoulders, the soft crease between his brows. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel love. I felt distance, a vast, echoing distance between who we were and who we'd become. And in that silence, something inside me began to move, not with fear, but with clarity. The next morning, I made him breakfast like nothing had changed. Eggs, toast, a little jam, his favorite. He kissed my cheek, told me he had a long day ahead, and left without looking twice. And I let him. I smiled. I even waved from the door. But the moment it shut behind him, I turned around and opened the drawer where he kept the spare keys. Then the tablet. His messages were all there, synced without a second thought, like he'd never imagined I'd look. The first text I read made my throat tighten, but I didn't cry. I took a screenshot, then another. Every "I miss you," every "can't wait to see you again," every time-stamped lie. My hands didn't shake. My breathing stayed steady. It was like my body had stepped into another version of me. Someone colder, smarter, quieter. The kind of woman who doesn't storm in screaming, but watches, collects, waits. Because some betrayals don't deserve rage. They deserve precision. I found GPS records next. He'd shared his location with me years ago for safety. I traced every late night back to a hotel 20 minutes away. Always the same one. Same pattern. And suddenly, everything lined up. The missed calls, the sudden errands, the barely worn gym clothes. I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. That would give him time to twist it, to prepare. No. I wanted the full truth. And I wanted him to hand it to me without even realizing it. I started talking to Claire from HR. Casually, over coffee at that little spot across from the office. I didn't ask directly, just dropped a few hints. Alex has been so stressed lately, I said. All those late nights. And her expression shifted. Just slightly. That tight little smile women give each other when they know more than they're allowed to say. She didn't spill anything. She didn't have to. I saw it in her eyes. The pity, the knowing. And that was enough. I started taking notes, names, dates, times. I backed up everything. The texts, the GPS pings, even a voicemail he left her by accident instead of me. I didn't even recognize his voice in it. So soft. So sweet. A man I hadn't heard in months. A man who wasn't mine anymore. But I didn't let it pull me under. I let it harden me. Each detail was a brick in a wall I was building, one that would stand long after he crumbled. And then I called a lawyer, quietly, professionally. I didn't go in with anger, just questions. What were my rights? What would I keep? What would I lose? The answers came steady, clear, and strangely empowering. I started setting up a private account, moved some funds, got a line on a part-time bookkeeping job I could take from home. I wasn't planning to leave with nothing. No, I was planning to walk out with everything I still deserved, and with my dignity intact. The hardest part wasn't finding the truth. It was pretending I didn't know. Sitting across from him at dinner while he scrolled through his phone, smiling into his lap. Letting him kiss my forehead goodnight with lips that still tasted like betrayal. Every moment felt like theater, like I was cast in a role I never auditioned for. But I played it well. Too well, maybe. He never once looked at me with suspicion. He believed I was still the same woman. And in some ways, I was. But only on the surface. Inside, I was changing. I no longer clung to the idea of fixing us. I let go of the fantasy. And in its place, I built something stronger. Resolve. This wasn't about getting even. It was about standing up, about showing the world, and him, that I saw it all, felt it all, and still chose to carry myself with grace. I wouldn't scream in a parking lot or send angry texts at 2 a.m. That's not who I am. That's not who I ever was. But I would make sure the truth was seen, not just by him, by everyone who mattered. the colleagues who looked up to him, the boss who praised him, the friends who toasted our anniversaries without knowing what he was really toasting to. I wasn't going to bury what he did in the dark. I was going to bring it into the light, carefully, deliberately, and when the moment came, I'd serve it cold. With a slice of cake, of course. A few weeks later, I sent out invitations. Nothing too formal, just a cheerful little email to Alex's office. "Join us for a small appreciation luncheon," I wrote, "to celebrate all the hard work Alex and his team have been doing." I even included a smiling photo of him from a past vacation. People replied quickly, all polite and excited. The secretary even RSVP'd. I smiled when I saw her name. I knew she'd come. They both would. They thought they were safe. I spent the evening before the luncheon baking. A few cakes, some cookies, even his favorite lemon tart. Every swirl of frosting, every carefully piped word. It was all deliberate. Not out of bitterness, but clarity. I wasn't showing up with rage. I was showing up with poise. I chose a soft pink dress, the kind that says, "I'm at peace, even when you're carrying a secret heavy as stone." I practiced my speech in front of the mirror, short, sweet, sincere. When I arrived at the office with the desserts, everyone was smiling. A few people clapped when they saw me, saying how thoughtful I was. I thanked them all. I hugged his boss. I asked someone to help me set up the projector in the corner of the room. "Just a little thank you video," I told them. "For Alex." And as I adjusted the screen, I caught a glimpse of him across the room, arm brushing hers, a low chuckle, that familiar glint in his eye. He never saw it coming. I waited until everyone had filled their plates, until the room buzzed with small talk and laughter. Alex stood beside me, smiling for photos, completely unaware. He kissed my cheek when someone asked for a picture, and I let him. I smiled, too, not because I meant it, but because the moment deserved it. Then, with a gentle tap of my glass, I asked for everyone's attention. The room quieted. Forks paused mid-air. Alex looked confused, maybe a little touched. He had no idea. "I just wanted to say thank you," I began. "To all of you, for supporting Alex, for your long hours, your dedication." I spoke softly, warmly, nothing dramatic. "I put together a little video," I added, "just a way to honor the man I've known all these years, a glimpse into the journey we've shared." And with that, the lights dimmed slightly, and the screen came to life. I stood at the edge of the room, just close enough to see his face. It started innocently. Pictures of our wedding, a clip of him holding our first dog, vacations, birthdays. People smiled, some even chuckled. Alex relaxed, his arm lightly brushing hers again. And then, the tone shifted. The screen showed a message thread, his name at the top, her replies below. "Last night was perfect. She suspects nothing." Then GPS pins, the hotel name, room numbers, dates, and finally, a blurry but unmistakable image, him, her, locked in a kiss in the office doorway. The silence that followed was almost sacred. Like the room itself couldn't believe what it had just witnessed. I didn't move. No one did. Alex's boss cleared his throat, a tight, awkward sound that shattered whatever illusion had been left standing. The HR director stood, straight-backed and expressionless. "The secretary?" She bolted. I heard the door click shut behind her, heels echoing down the hallway like a final punctuation mark. And Alex, poor, stunned Alex, just stared at the screen, color draining from his face. He turned to me, mouth opening like he might say something, anything. An apology, a lie, a plea. But I raised one hand, just enough to stop him. Not with anger, not even with pain, just calm. I stepped forward, faced the room, and said, "I thought I was bringing you sweetness. Turns out, you already had dessert." A few gasps. Someone let out a soft, Oh my God. And I smiled, not cruelly, but peacefully, because that moment wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. I didn't stay long after that. I thanked his boss again, hugged Claire from HR, collected my serving trays with the grace of someone who hadn't just shattered a man's professional and personal life in under 5 minutes. I walked out into the sun, warm cake still on my fingers, and breathed in a deep, clean breath. The kind you take when the weight is finally off your chest. And as I stepped into my car, I knew I hadn't just exposed a lie. I'd reclaimed my voice. The divorce wasn't messy. He didn't fight me. Not really. I think deep down, he knew he'd lost the right to argue. I kept my voice steady in every meeting. I didn't gloat, didn't cry. I just signed where I needed to sign, answered what I had to answer. I walked away with part of the assets, the house I loved, and something far more important, my dignity. The silence between us now wasn't bitter. It was just final. And that was enough. With the settlement behind me, I turned my attention to something I'd always dreamed of but never dared to start. A little bakery. Nothing fancy. Just a sunlit corner shop downtown with chipped tiles and a secondhand espresso machine. I spent long nights testing recipes, painting walls, choosing the perfect name. It felt like breathing again after holding it in for too long. Every loaf of bread, every frosted cupcake. It wasn't just food. It was a piece of me, finally rising. People started coming. First, a few curious neighbors, then families, then strangers who became regulars. They'd sip their coffee, compliment the lemon tart, and ask if the woman behind the counter was the owner. I'd smile and nod. I never told them the full story. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't need to anymore. I was no longer the woman who found her husband cheating. I was the woman who rose, who rebuilt. One cake at a time. There were moments I still thought of him. Not with longing, not even with anger, just reflection. Like seeing an old photograph of someone you used to know. He became a part of the story, not the whole thing. And that, to me, was healing. Sometimes I'd hear a song we used to dance to in the kitchen, or see his favorite chocolate in the grocery aisle, and I'd pause. But the ache was gone. In its place, a kind of softness, the kind that comes with survival. One rainy Thursday afternoon, I was behind the counter, wiping down trays, when the door chimed. I looked up, and there he was. Alex. Standing in the doorway, soaked from the rain, holding his coat like it might shield him from the past. He looked smaller somehow. Older. Eyes searching the room like he wasn't sure if he should have come in. Our eyes met, and I felt nothing sharp, just stillness. A quiet calm. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile either. He stepped up to the counter and cleared his throat. "Smells like lemon. Still your signature," he said. I nodded, pulled a slice of cake from the display, plated it gently. No words, just hands moving with memory. I set it in front of him. "This one's on the house," I said. And before he could speak again, I added, without bitterness, without drama, just like the lesson. He blinked, then lowered his eyes, took a bite, chewed in silence. I watched him for a moment, fork moving slowly, eyes fixed on the plate. There was no apology, no explanation. And I didn't ask for one. I didn't need it. That cake wasn't for him. It was for me. A symbol, a reminder, that I had walked through betrayal, through silence, through the wreckage of what we once were, and still come out standing, still kind, still whole. He finished the slice and looked up like he might say something more, but I had already turned away. I disappeared into the kitchen, the warm hum of the oven greeting me like an old friend. Behind me, the bell above the door chimed once more, and then he was gone. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. There were trays to fill, orders to prepare, and customers to greet. Life, my life, was moving forward, and for the first time in years, I wasn't chasing anything. I was choosing, creating, building something that belonged to me, and only me. Some stories don't need to end with thunder. Sometimes they end in the quiet dignity of knowing who you are, and who you'll never be again. I built a new life not in spite of what happened, but because of it. And every time I hand someone a slice of cake, I smile. Not because everything turned out perfectly, but because I did. And that, after everything, is the sweetest part.
I've been unhappy for years, Daniel began, smiling faintly as he stood before our gathered friends and family. I want a divorce. The clinking of his champagne glass still echoed in the air as his words landed like a grenade in the middle of our 25th anniversary celebration. Our adult children, Thomas and Jennifer, stared with their mouths agape. Friends froze mid-sip, eyes darting between us. The restaurant's private dining room, which I'd decorated with silver anniversary decorations and photographs spanning our decades together, suddenly felt airless. I simply nodded and replied, "I understand completely." Something flickered across Daniel's face. Surprise, perhaps disappointment at my composure. He'd expected tears, begging, or public humiliation. Instead, I turned to each stunned guest and thanked them warmly for coming to what had become our final celebration as a couple. My name is Marlene Griffin. I'm 57 years old, and after spending a quarter-century devoted to my marriage, raising our children, managing our household in Richmond, Virginia, and supporting Daniel through 3 career changes, 2 financial disasters, and 1 major health scare, I found myself standing in an elegant restaurant watching my husband try to blindside me with our divorce. As the party awkwardly dispersed, guests murmuring sympathies and shooting daggers at Daniel, I approached him with the calm of someone who had made peace with a hurricane long before it hit shore. "You'll want to call them first thing in the morning," I said, slipping a single business card into his hand. His eyes widened as he read the name on the embossed card. Rebecca Stone, Esquire, one of the most feared divorce attorneys in Virginia. "Why would you have this?" he asked, his voice suddenly less certain. I simply smiled, patted his arm, and walked away to hug our bewildered children. Over their shoulders, I watched Daniel's confident expression crumble as the first inkling that something was wrong pierced his self-assurance. What he didn't know, what I'd made absolutely certain he didn't know, was that 6 months earlier, while looking for our property tax statement in his desk drawer, I had discovered a lease agreement for an apartment in Shockoe Bottom, our city's trendy downtown district. 2 days later, I glimpsed a series of disturbingly intimate texts between him and someone labeled only as co-worker when his phone lit up during dinner. And that was just the beginning of what I knew. By the time Daniel dropped his divorce bombshell at our anniversary party, I had spent half a year methodically documenting every aspect of his betrayal. He thought he was ending our marriage on his terms, but I had been preparing my exit strategy with military precision since Valentine's Day. Growing up, my grandmother always told me, "Trust, but verify." It was advice I had largely ignored throughout my marriage. I believed in Daniel completely. We met when I was 30, and he was 32. Both of us working at Falwyn Security, me in human resources, him as a rising star in sales. Our courtship was a whirlwind, and within a year, we were married with a prenuptial agreement that protected both of us if things ever went south. 2 beautiful children followed, and I eventually stepped back from my career to manage our growing family while Daniel's sales career soared. He moved from Falwyn to Brightvale Mining, and then to Everkin Motors, climbing the corporate ladder with each jump. I supported every decision, every late night, every weekend business trip, even as our children grew up and needed their father at soccer games and dance recitals that he inevitably missed. "Your dad is working hard for all of us," I would tell them, believing it myself. And he did provide well. Our colonial home in the West End neighborhood, private schools for the kids, and comfortable family vacations twice a year. But looking back, I can see the signs I missed. The gradual emotional distance, the growing criticism of my appearance compared to the dynamic professionals he worked with, the diminishing physical intimacy explained away by stress and aging. Marriage changes after 20 years, my friends would assure me. It's normal to become more like roommates. What wasn't normal were the growing number of business dinners that left his collar smelling of perfume I didn't wear, or the second cell phone I discovered in his briefcase when packing it for a hospital stay after his gallbladder surgery 3 years ago, a phone he claimed was just for international clients, and that mysteriously disappeared after his recovery. I convinced myself these were misunderstandings. The alternative was too painful to consider, until Valentine's Day this year. Daniel had forgotten the holiday entirely, not unusual in recent years, but claimed a last-minute client emergency when I mentioned our dinner reservation. I spent the evening alone, flipping through old photo albums and wondering how we had drifted so far from the couple in those faded pictures. The next morning, I decided to file our tax paperwork early and needed our property records. That's when I found it, tucked between home insurance documents and car titles, a lease agreement for an apartment on East Carey Street, signed 2 months earlier. Daniel's signature, clear as day, on a 1-bedroom unit that cost nearly a third of his monthly take-home pay. That discovery would change everything about how I approached our 25th year of marriage. I sat in my car outside the apartment building for 3 hours that day, paralyzed between confronting him immediately and pretending I never saw the lease. The elegant brick building with its rooftop deck and floor-to-ceiling windows mocked everything I thought I knew about our financial situation. "We need to be more careful with spending this year," Daniel had told me just weeks before I found the lease. "The market's unstable." Yet he had somehow found money for a $2,800 monthly rental in the city's most desirable neighborhood, money that was supposedly too tight for the kitchen renovation I'd been requesting for 5 years. When I finally drove home, I made 2 decisions that would alter the trajectory of my life. First, I would not confront Daniel until I understood exactly what I was facing. Second, I would protect myself by gathering every shred of evidence possible before making any moves. The next morning, while Daniel was at the gym, I examined his phone. He thought himself clever using a fingerprint lock, but I had long ago noticed he used his right thumb to unlock it. While he slept, I had carefully pressed his thumb to the sensor, checking messages that confirmed my worst fears. He and his coworker, Jessica Palmer, had been involved for at least 18 months. Their texts were explicit, filled with references to our place and plans for a future together once he handled things at home. Reading their exchanges, I learned Jessica was 34, recently divorced herself, and worked in marketing at Everkin Motors. She had apparently convinced Daniel that their May-December relationship was his ticket to renewed youth and excitement. My hands shook as I photographed key conversations with my own phone, making sure to capture timestamps and contact information. The physical pain of betrayal was overwhelming, a vice grip around my chest that made breathing difficult. 25 years of memories, twisted by the knowledge that our recent history had been built on lies. That evening, as Daniel kissed my cheek absently before diving into work emails, I struggled to maintain my composure. The urge to scream, to demand answers, to throw his deception in his face was nearly overwhelming. Instead, I smiled and brought him his favorite evening bourbon. "Working late again?" I asked casually. "Quarterly reports are coming up," he replied without looking up. "Don't wait up." I nodded, retreating to our bedroom, where I allowed myself 10 minutes of silent tears before calling my oldest friend, Valerie. "I need the name of the best divorce attorney in Richmond," I said when she answered, "and I need absolute discretion." 2 days later, I sat across from Rebecca Stone in her downtown office, laying out what little evidence I had gathered so far. The distinguished attorney with her silver-streaked bob and penetrating gaze listened without interruption before saying words that would become my mantra over the coming months. "We won't just build a case, Marlene. We'll build an ironclad fortress. But first, we need to understand exactly what we're up against. Rebecca's advice was clear. Become an intelligence operative in my own marriage. Document everything, follow the money. Build a complete picture of our marital assets and Daniel's activities before giving him any indication I knew about his betrayal. The element of surprise is your greatest advantage, she counseled. The moment he knows you're aware, he'll start hiding assets and constructing his own narrative. So began my double life. On the surface, I remained the supportive wife of 25 years, managing our home, attending company functions on Daniel's arm, and planning our upcoming anniversary celebration. Beneath that facade, I transformed into a methodical investigator, documenting every aspect of our financial and personal lives. I started with our finances. Daniel had always handled the investments while I managed the household accounts. Now I needed to understand the full scope of our portfolio. I told him I wanted to learn more about investing for my own knowledge, a request he dismissed with patronizing amusement, but ultimately granted by sharing our financial advisor's contact information. Just don't make any changes without consulting me first, he cautioned. These things are complicated. Our financial advisor, Harold Wilson, was initially reluctant to discuss details with me until I gently reminded him that as Daniel's spouse, I had legal right to information about our joint assets. Once convinced, Harold became surprisingly forthcoming, particularly after I mentioned concerns about unusual money movements. Well, there have been some significant withdrawals over the past year and a half, Harold admitted. I assumed Daniel discussed these with you. He hadn't. The withdrawals totaled nearly $320,000, money apparently transferred from our joint investment accounts to a separate entity I'd never heard of, Griffin Consulting, LLC. Daniel established it as a side business venture, Harold explained, for consulting work separate from his main employment. A business I knew nothing about. A shell company, as Rebecca later explained, likely created to funnel marital assets away from our shared portfolio. I photographed every document Harold shared, noting dates, amounts, and account numbers. My next step was accessing our home computer. Daniel wasn't particularly tech-savvy and used the same passwords for most accounts, variations of our children's birthdays combined with our anniversary date. The irony wasn't lost on me as I used Jenny052Tom719 to access his email account. What I found confirmed my suspicions and revealed new betrayals. Email exchanges with a realtor about purchasing a condominium in Charlotte, North Carolina. An offer letter from Hailstra Audio, a company based in Charlotte, dated 3 months earlier. Flight confirmations for weekend trips he'd claimed were golf outings with clients, and dozens of emails to Jessica discussing their future plans. Once the anniversary party is behind us, I'll handle the divorce quickly, he wrote in one message. Marlene will be devastated, but she'll get over it. The timing works perfectly with the Charlotte move. They had it all planned. He would announce our divorce at the anniversary party, positioning himself as the honest husband who had simply fallen out of love, but had respectfully waited for our milestone anniversary before moving on. Then he would relocate to Charlotte with Jessica, taking his new position at Hailstra and living in the condominium they had already selected together. I sat at our desk, reading their calculated plans for dismantling my life, and felt something inside me harden. This wasn't just an affair or midlife crisis. This was a comprehensive campaign to discard me with minimal financial consequence to himself after I had devoted my entire adult life to supporting his success. That night, I made a silent promise. Daniel Griffin would not know what hit him. With Rebecca's guidance, I expanded my investigation. I needed to understand not just what Daniel was planning, but what legal vulnerabilities existed in his strategy. Our prenuptial agreement had been straightforward. In the event of divorce, each party would retain assets brought into the marriage, while assets accumulated during the marriage would be divided equally. However, there was a critical infidelity clause that Rebecca immediately highlighted. If either party engages in extramarital affairs, they forfeit their right to certain protections. she explained. Most importantly, the injured spouse is entitled to a significantly larger percentage of marital assets acquired during the years of infidelity. The key would be proving when the affair began. If I could establish that Daniel's relationship with Jessica had extended over years, rather than months, I could potentially claim rights to much more than half our marital property, including portions of his retirement accounts and stock options. I hired a private investigator, William Jacobs, who specialized in infidelity cases. His services weren't cheap, but I pulled from my personal savings account, money I'd squirreled away from my occasional freelance HR consulting work that Daniel knew nothing about. William confirmed that Daniel and Jessica's relationship traced back at least 2 years. He provided photographs of them dining together, entering and leaving the apartment, and traveling to Charlotte on weekends when Daniel had claimed to be on golf trips. But the most damning evidence came from interviews William conducted with staff at Everken Motors. According to 3 separate sources within the company, their relationship was common knowledge as early as spring of 2023, William reported. One former executive assistant kept a detailed work diary that references them spending time alone in his office with the door locked on multiple occasions. The assistant had been dismissed shortly after, allegedly for performance issues. William located her, and she was more than happy to share her records and testify if needed, still bitter about her unceremonious termination that she believed was orchestrated to keep her silent. Armed with this information, Rebecca added workplace harassment implications to our strategy. If necessary, we can suggest that Everken Motors could face legal exposure for allowing a senior executive to engage in an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate, she explained. It's leverage we may not need to use, but it's valuable to have. As the weeks passed, I continued gathering evidence while maintaining a perfect facade of ignorance. I suggested the anniversary party, knowing it aligned with what Daniel had told Jessica. I spoke enthusiastically about the next 25 years, when around friends and family. I even initiated physical intimacy occasionally, something that clearly made Daniel uncomfortable, but that he couldn't reject without raising suspicions. Each time he invented a work excuse to visit the apartment or Charlotte, I simply smiled and told him I understood. Each time he complained about finances while secretly funding his double life, I nodded sympathetically. All the while, my case file grew thicker. 3 weeks before our anniversary, I made a crucial discovery. While backing up family photos to our cloud storage, I found a folder Daniel had apparently created by mistake in our shared account. It contained explicit photographs of him and Jessica together in the apartment, images dated consistently over the past 2 years. I immediately forwarded them to Rebecca and William, who confirmed they provided clear visual proof of the timeline of infidelity. The final piece clicked into place. "We're ready," Rebecca told me during our last meeting before the anniversary party. "The moment he makes his move, we'll respond with overwhelming force. He won't know what hit him." I left her office feeling strangely calm. After months of investigation, documentation, and strategic planning, there was nothing left to do but wait for Daniel to spring his trap, unaware that he was walking straight into mine. The anniversary party was my masterpiece of deception. I selected the Jefferson Hotel's grand ballroom, arranged for a string quartet, and designed a sophisticated evening celebrating a lifetime of partnership. The invitations, ivory cardstock with silver embossing, went to 60 of our closest friends and family members. I watched Daniel's face as I showed him the final guest list. "This seems excessive," he remarked, clearly discomforted by the scale of a celebration he knew would end in devastation. 25 years deserve something special," I replied innocently. "Don't worry about the cost. I've been saving for this." The evening arrived, and I wore a silver gown that had taken 3 fittings to perfect. Daniel seemed increasingly agitated as guests arrived, each congratulating us on reaching such a significant milestone. Our children had flown in, Thomas from Seattle, Jennifer from Boston, and both gave touching toasts about growing up watching their parents' loving partnership. "You've shown us what commitment really means," Jennifer said, raising her glass while Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside me. Throughout dinner, I noticed Daniel checking his watch, his face growing more resolved with each passing hour. I knew he was following the timeline he'd discussed with Jessica. Make the announcement after dinner but before dessert, allowing for a dignified exit while guests were still present to support Marlene. When he finally stood and clinked his glass, a hush fell over the room. I watched his practiced smile, the rehearsed casualness in his posture, and thought about how many times he must have envisioned this moment, his declaration of independence, his new beginning at my expense. "I have something important to say," he began, his voice steady. "After much reflection, I want to be honest with everyone here tonight." He paused, scanning the room before continuing. "I've been unhappy for years," he said, the practiced line falling flat in the elegant ballroom. "I want a divorce." The collective gasp was audible. Jennifer dropped her champagne glass, shattering it on the hardwood floor. Thomas half rose from his chair, confusion and anger battling on his face. Our friends stared in disbelief. But I was ready. I had rehearsed this moment just as carefully as Daniel had. I simply nodded and replied, "I understand completely." The confusion on his face was worth every moment of the past 6 months' deception. He had expected tears, pleading, perhaps even a scene. Instead, he got calm acceptance that clearly disrupted his narrative of being the reasonable party bringing an overdue end to an unhappy marriage. "I think we should thank everyone for coming," I continued smoothly, standing to address our shocked guests. "This has been a wonderful celebration of the past, even as we move toward different futures." One by one, I hugged each departing guest, accepting their whispered condolences and confused support with gracious smiles. Daniel stood awkwardly by the gift table, looking increasingly uncertain as his dramatic moment fizzled into uncomfortable social navigation. When the last guest had gone, save for our children who waited tearfully by the door, I approached Daniel with practiced composure. "You'll want to call them first thing in the morning," I said, slipping Rebecca's business card into his hand. He stared at the card, recognition dawning slowly. "Rebecca Stone? The divorce attorney?" "Yes," I confirmed. "She's quite selective about her clients, but she made an exception for me. 6 months ago." The blood drained from his face as comprehension set in. 6 months? "Don't worry about coming home tonight," I continued pleasantly. "I had the locks changed this afternoon. Your essentials are packed in a suitcase at the coat check. I believe you have somewhere else to stay, don't you?" As he stood frozen in shock, I turned to our children, linking my arms through theirs. "Let's go have that cake at home. I think we've had enough celebration for one evening." Daniel's lawyer called at 7:13 a.m. the following morning. I was already awake, having slept better than I had in months. "This is Philip Dawson representing Daniel Griffin," the voice announced stiffly. "I understand there's a situation we need to discuss." "Please direct all communication to Rebecca Stone," I replied, following the script Rebecca and I had prepared. "She's expecting your call." By 9 a.m., Rebecca called to report that Daniel was attempting damage control by offering a quick, generous settlement, a clear indication he hadn't yet grasped the extent of my preparation. "He's offering a 60-40 split of current visible assets in your favor, plus the house," she said. "Should I tell him we're just getting started?" "Absolutely." At 11 a.m., the formal divorce papers were served to Daniel at the Everkin Motors headquarters by a process server who, at my request, delivered them during a board meeting Daniel was leading. The thick document detailed not only my terms, 85% of marital assets, the house, and significant alimony, but included comprehensive evidence of his infidelity, financial deception, and plans to leave the state. By noon, 3 things happened in rapid succession. Daniel's lawyer requested an emergency meeting, Everkin's human resources director called Daniel to their offices, and Jessica Palmer cleaned out her desk and left the building in tears. When Rebecca met with Daniel and his lawyer that afternoon, she brought the final bombshell. William's full investigative report, complete with witness statements from former Everkin employees about the inappropriate workplace relationship. My client is prepared to contact Everkin's board directly regarding the company's failure to address this situation if we cannot reach a satisfactory agreement, Rebecca informed them. Additionally, we have documentation of the Griffin Consulting LLC shell company used to divert marital assets, which raises questions of tax impropriety that authorities might find interesting. Daniel's attempt to seize control of our divorce narrative had completely collapsed in less than 24 hours. His lawyer requested a brief recess, during which I imagine he delivered some very unwelcome news to my husband of 25 years. The settlement negotiations were remarkably brief. Daniel, facing potential professional disgrace, tax investigations, and the complete destruction of the narrative he'd constructed about our marriage, accepted terms that went far beyond what even Rebecca had initially thought possible. I received 85% of our marital assets, including full ownership of our home, his retirement accounts, and investment portfolios. Daniel retained only his personal possessions, his car, and a single investment account worth approximately 1/5 of our total net worth. The alimony payments would continue for 10 years, ensuring my financial security well into retirement age. Most satisfying was the non-disclosure agreement. Daniel would never publicly discuss the circumstances of our divorce, effectively preventing him from spinning a sympathetic narrative about our separation. In exchange, I agreed not to contact Everkin's board directly about his relationship with Jessica, though I made no promises about what information might find its way to them through other channels. 2 days after our anniversary party, Jennifer and Thomas came for dinner. They were still reeling from the public dissolution of their parents' marriage, but had begun to understand the situation after I shared selected details of Daniel's betrayal. "How did you stay so calm through all of this?" Jennifer asked, pouring another glass of wine. "I would have burned his clothes on the front lawn or something." "Strategic patience," I explained. "Your father never appreciated my intelligence. He saw me as the supportive wife, nothing more. That blind spot gave me the advantage." Thomas shook his head in amazement. "Remind me never to cross you, Mom." I smiled, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in months. I didn't want revenge initially. I just wanted fairness. But when I saw how comprehensively he had planned to discard me, I decided he needed to understand exactly whom he was dealing with. 1 month after the anniversary party, Daniel relocated to Charlotte as planned, alone, significantly poorer, and professionally diminished. Jessica, it turned out, had lost interest once his financial prospects dramatically changed. The condominium they had selected together was now beyond his means, and Halestra Audio had rescinded their offer upon learning of the circumstances of his departure from Everkin. I, meanwhile, began the next chapter of my life on my own terms, with resources, dignity, and the profound satisfaction of knowing that when tested, I had risen to the challenge with intelligence and strength I hadn't known I possessed. As I settled into my reclaimed life, I reflected on the irony that in trying to discard me, Daniel had inadvertently freed me to become more fully myself than I had been in 25 years of marriage.